Hello, fellow cyborgs. Today I'm going to talk with you about the 5-star books I've read this year. So these 4 5 stars, and I'm going to sneak in one honorable mention that was like a 4.5 star, they have some very interesting characteristics. I owned none of these books before this year. Only one of them I owned at the time that I read them. Most of them I borrowed from the library, and most of them I read over audiobook rather than physical format. I'm starting to wonder if me being pleasantly surprised is a large part in how I give out 5 stars as opposed to a book that I had high expectations for. So I'll just have to monitor that and see if that's the formula for how I give out 5 stars. But let's start off with our first book. I finally got to The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This has been on a lot of people's top books since it came out, which I think was in 2020, but do not quote me. So this is about a group of friends who are Native Americans living in America, and one by one, their shared past starts coming back to haunt them. The thing that I loved about this was how the horror elements of the story kind of blend in with folklore and legend, but also blend in with just like human psychology and how we can destroy ourselves. I also loved the integration of political and social issues around being a Native American and the issues that you have to deal with on a daily basis, the racism that you face, which is distinct, and also some bits of culture, Native American culture as well. This was creepy and thrilling, and I liked the characters a lot. I wanted to read more about them. I wasn't just there for the thrills. It wasn't too horrifying for me, though there were a few scenes that have some pretty graphic body horror. So definitely one of the highlights of the year. I am so glad that I finally read this and did not let the hype get to me, and I will probably be checking out more by Stephen Graham Jones in the future. Another hyped book is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. I've heard about this years ago on the booktube community, but I never got to it. Partly it was because of the hype, but after reading Catherine Arden's trilogy, the Bear and the Nightingale trilogy, it's called something else, but it starts with The Bear and the Nightingale, I decided I liked her writing enough to finally give this a try. This is a middle grade horror novel that has such beautiful autumnal imagery and feelings. It was the way she captured that season and some of the stereotypical things that you think of, specifically like in New England, in America during the Halloween season and the autumnal season. It was so enriching, and I loved it so much. I also found that this is one of I haven't read a lot of middle grade horror, but I found the horror elements to be really effective. Even as an adult, I was freaked out by this. Not overly, but where it was like, yes, you did it. So I didn't tell you what this is about. This follows a young girl named Ollie who comes in possession of this odd older book, which she's fascinated by and will stay up late to read. She originally thinks it's fiction, but as the story unfolds, you realize that it is not fiction. The things that she has read about in the book suddenly become relevant when she's on a field trip with her class at this local farm. Things start to go wrong, and it seems like Ollie is the only one who has the information to be able to piece all of the things together. This also has great themes of friendship and problem solving, and also of dealing with grief because her mother had recently died. I really love how that manifests in the book, and I found also the main antagonist to be really intriguing, kept me guessing. I just really enjoyed this world, so much that I immediately read the second book, which is called Dead Voices and takes place during wintertime, and it feels very much like winter, but I did not love it as much as Small Spaces. I just might have to read this again when autumn rolls around because it just perfectly captures that atmosphere. Next, I'm going to be talking about Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, which you have heard me talk about in a previous video where I talked about all of the YA fantasy I've been reading. But this is one of the 5-star reads of the year, so I'm going to tell you about it again because if you didn't pick it up from the last video, you really should. So this story takes place in the days leading up to El Dia de los Muertos, and Yadriel is our main character. He is a trans young man with a family who doesn't really understand how to accept him. To complicate that matter, his family is a Brujex family, which means that they have magical abilities that center around caring for the dead that culminate in the Day of the Dead. And the powers that his family members have is divided along the gender lines. And so Yads wants to prove to his family that he is a brujo and he wants to be doing the masculine tasks, the masculine magical tasks that his family has to do in order to prove to himself that he truly is himself and can fit in with his family. But to complicate his plans, he ends up becoming tied to a ghost named Julian, who recently died but doesn't know how, Yads has to spend time appeasing Julian while he's still trying to prove to his family that he fits in with them. I loved how my immediate stereotypical idea of who Julian was slowly picked apart in this book, and it reminded me very much that people are not what they seem at all. I really loved the magic system of Yad's Brujo family, and hearing about how we can turn elements of El Dia de los Muertos into a fantasy magic system. It was so rich and eye-opening, and I'd never read anything like it before, and it really enchanted me. All of the characters in here were real. I felt that all of them were true people, and I loved how Yads had a best friend named Maritza, who also is not doing the magical side of her family, but for her it's by choice because she is a vegan, and when you are a woman, you do healing magic that requires the blood of animals, which she just refuses to do. It's a nice foil, but also the fact that Yads has this support system in Maritza, even though the rest of his family, it might be a little bit rocky. I also loved the relationship between Yads and Julian, seeing how that develops from a quiet animosity to true understanding of one another. This was just so lovely, and even though I predicted where the plot was going to go, it did not diminish my enjoyment in the least, and in fact, I was so incredibly satisfied with the ending. The entire time I was convinced that this could not work out, but somehow Aidan Thomas was able for it to work out without it feeling like a Deus Ex Machina sort of mechanism. It was wonderful. I just loved this, and I think I might need to buy the audiobook. It was so enjoyable to listen to. I purchased the hard copy to support the author, but Avi Roque, who narrated the audiobook, did such a wonderful job. I don't know that I would want to read this any other way. The final 5-star is Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is very not on brand for Amanda because this is a post-apocalyptic horror novel that kind of dips into elements of fantasy as well, but I definitely stay away from the apocalypses because that tends to be way too rapey and gritty for me. This is definitely not rapey, but it definitely is gritty. It goes there. It has violence. It has action, terrifying action, and it definitely has horror elements to it. This follows Maggie, who is a monster hunter. She is also Native American, specifically what was formerly known as Navajo, but in this world it's called Dineta. So she is an outsider but also respected by her community. So the post-apocalyptic world building, so much fun to read about, and I am not going to tell you very much about it because there is joy in slowly discovering what this world looks like. But the Dineta live in a walled community, and they're very insular, and it's also one of the safest places to live in this world. But she's still an outsider because as much as people need her services to help track down monsters, all she does is deal out death, and that's just not somebody that you want to be friends with. So she is very much alone and has only a few people in her life that are a support system for her. And she ends up teaming up with this man named Kai, who is the nephew, if I remember correctly, of one of these people who are her support systems. He's a father figure for her. And they end up teaming up to figure out a mystery of attacks that have been happening in their community. Kai he's not perfect, but he is one of the most welcoming representations of a man specifically interacting with a woman that I have ever read. It was just so wonderful to see how two people could just be friends and coexist and flirt with one another, but there be no power move or aggression behind it. And again, Kai is flawed, but I love him. He just seems wonderful. And I wish there were more representations of people like him and how he interacts with the people around him. Maggie has her baggage. Maggie doesn't trust people. Maggie is standoffish. And Kai is welcoming, warm, funny, can schmooze like nobody's business. And it's a really fun dynamic to read. So this was just fast-paced, fun, adventurous, horrifying, lovely, and I loved it so much. And I read the second book. Again, it did not measure up to the first. I enjoyed it. Not as much as the first one, but I will definitely be reading more from this author. And the honorable mention I would like to talk to you about, which got 4.5 stars, is Perla by Carolina de Robertis. This is a magical realist book by a Latinx author. I'm not sure if she is Argentinian, but this takes place in Argentina. It's a split narrative where part of the novel takes place in the early 2000s, where our main character is Perla, and she comes home one day. She still lives in her home with her parents, though they are vacationing, to find pretty much a ghost in the middle of her living room. He is a naked man who is sopping wet and doesn't seem to be very coherent. And she just kind of bats an eye and goes about her day and kind of interacts with him. And then the second half of the book is we get this ghost's perspective as he slowly comes to remember what happened to him, who he is, the circumstances of his death, which are all tied up with it was the late 1970s and early 80s when the military took over the government and 30,000 people were disappeared. They were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. The government pretended like they just left the country because they were dissidents and they're just in exile and will one day return. So this book is very much tied up with identity and Perla coming to terms with who she is now versus what kind of a childhood she had. We see her as she re-examines her life and we see the first moment that she hears about the disappeared and she gets one explanation of it from a friend at school and a completely different explanation from her parents. And she's having to make decisions about who do I believe when there are such completely opposite views of what happened in history. And then we're also with this ghost character as he's slowly piecing together who he is and what truly happened to him. We also pick apart what's currently happening with Perla. We know that she's recently split or had a huge fight with her boyfriend, but we don't know what that's about. So we have a lot of these like little interpersonal mysteries that are happening all at once, and they end up converging on one central theme. The only reason why I didn't give this 5 stars is because some of the topics in here are just very dark. And I don't know how willing I would be to reread this, knowing that so much of it has to do with this horrible torture that happened to 30,000 people. But the way that it's written, it flows kind of dreamlike in some ways, but it's still grounded in reality. I loved the deep psychological explorations that Perla is having with herself. I loved how De Robertis represented coming back into consciousness after having been dead and now manifesting in somebody's living room. I really enjoyed how we slowly got the puzzle pieces of this ghost's life. I loved how the history was integrated. I have not read a lot of Latinx literature, especially historical literature or literature that is talking about historical events that I was never taught in school. And so a lot of times what's happening goes over my head. I don't really know what's happening. But the way that De Robertis was able to integrate the history into this novel, and maybe she just picked something relatively a small aspect of this history, but whatever it was, it worked for me. I was not confused and it made me want to learn more as opposed to being overwhelmed at what I didn't know. So this was excellent. I so enjoyed it. It was wonderful. It was a little bit heartbreaking, beautiful, and you should definitely put it on your radar if you don't have it there already. So those were all of the 5 stars that I've read this year. 5 stars this year. So far, that's pretty good. I feel like that's a pretty good number. Most years I average probably about 10 and some of them are rereads. So I'm pretty pleased with this and also really pleased that the library gives me free access to so many wonderful audiobooks. So please let me know in the comments down below one of the 5 stars that you've read this year and tell me why I need to read it. And until next time, read some more 5-star books and continue to be lovely. Okay, so the world building, this post-apocalyptic